Hey everyone, today I'll be reacting to this now, in fact, viral video of this clip from the Joe Rogan podcast where Candace Owens and Joe Rogan debate and in fact even argue over the topic of climate change. Obviously, Candace is a climate change denier, and Joe Rogan probably would consider himself a climate agnostic, not a skeptic, but an agnostic, at least as to what he's conveying in this video. However, though, the point of this video really isn't a lot about this conversation between these two. It really isn't as substantial as you'd think a conversation on climate change would be. But rather, my goal is, in fact, to be rather manipulative and to exploit their names to use it's in fact clickbait, as you would call it, to use this conversation between Joe Rogan and Candace Owens and to exploit it really to try and make some more substantial philosophical points pertaining to the philosophy of science and perhaps what we colloquially call in debate bro circles the science. The science says this, and so on and so on, and then try to discuss why. Interestingly, if I would have picked between Candace and Joe in this conversation, I would still align with Joe, but I think Joe too makes certain mistakes in his sort of objective agnostic sense to the climate change debate, and I'll discuss why that is as we go through the video today. So the agenda, I kind of wanted to put down an agenda because I don't get too carried away. Is firstly a live reaction. This probably you can skip this bit really if you want, because I won't break down every single argument that Candace makes. Nor this word. Well, I'll probably expand more on certain points that Joe makes because Candace, for me at least, is clearly wrong. It's very conspicuous that she's wrong, and she's extremely ideological, like we all are. But Joe does make some good points, even though I still think he's wrong too. So if you want, you could skip the live reaction. It's not going to be anything too substantial. But the part that I really want to pay attention to and try to really flesh out is the other two parts of the agenda for this video, which is to discuss Aristotle's notion of frenesis, or to put it in more of a colloquial sense, practical wisdom or pragmatic wisdom. And I want to try to connect that concept, that idea by Aristotle, to how modern science or the modern institution of science functions in our society. And then I want to go through this paper, which I've gone through before with this channel, by David Gangnam. He's got the YouTube channel Theory and Philosophy. And he wrote a paper in 2016 called Jordan Peterson and the Flow of Scientific Inquiry. And I'm not going to pay, really, Jordan Peterson, he doesn't matter here. He's not a part of this conversation at all, or this video at all. It's just a paper does expand on Aristotle's idea of phronesis and the Aristotelian notion of practical wisdom and how it pertains to science, and how scientific knowledge isn't as objective as we think it is. So that really is the purpose of this video. But it's probably a good thing to start off with this conversation because, firstly, as I said, I want to exploit it, but also it does show how when we discuss, when we talk about science in the domain of politics, we hold so many presuppositions that are just rather arbitrary axioms that we just make assumptions on without being critical of them or critiquing them. And I think that's a problem. So this conversation will probably show that. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started with the reaction video. So,
Night walkers at the point.
But I don't understand how you think that we're almost losing America and there's a battle for America.
I really feel that, like, just in every regard, in terms of just the people that were running, like Hillary Clinton. Like, this woman was a globalist. Like, just think about who we were in bed with, like Saudi Arabia, selling all of our uranium to Russia. Like,
putting out spewing a lot of garbage there, bunch of nonsense. I'm just gonna, it's really, because what she's saying here doesn't really pertain to the conversation or the title of this video of scientific truth. Let me just fast forward this.
Trump came in and was like, no, like America, people, we were at the gap, like we're losing the middle class. The gap between the rich and the poor was like literally.
What do you think is causing that?
Policies, shipping all of our jobs overseas, the regulation, the government getting bigger and bigger. You can't do anything as an entrepreneur in America without a piece of paper from the government, discouraging people with a piece of paper, like shutting down the factories, forgetting that there's something, there's a little land between New York and LA, believe it or not. And this is what Trump understood. We were losing that. And Trump appealed to those people. I'm still floored. Like, as I'm traveling the world and seeing different pieces of the country, I'm learning how ignorant I was. And that's the best thing in the entire world.
Way?
Just, I fell victim to the idea that, it was progress. We have to care about the environment. It was progress. And it's like, no, we've been losing. America has been losing. And Donald Trump understood that in a way that I didn't. And
you don't think we have to care about the environment? Like,
no, not even a little bit.
All right, now it starts, right? So, first of all, look at that condescending, this arrogant kind of smirk she gives to Joe when Joe, I would say, as we all should, question and ask, you don't think we don't have to care about the environment?
Trump understood that in a way that I didn't, and
I don't think we have to care about the environment? Like, what do you
no, not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit?
No. Okay, let me clarify this. I don't throw trash on the ground. I'm not saying we need to trash the environment. But do I believe in climate change? No.
You don't believe in climate change?
Well, I think the climate always changes, I guess is what I should say. Do I believe that this is an issue?
So obviously that's the first thing we've got to point out here. It's not that the climate changes all the time. It is that does human activity cause such radical shifts in the climate that could endanger the existence of all living beings, or at least our species, Homo sapiens. So that is a problem. But anyway, I'm not going to get into the climate science here, particularly given I'm not an expert in the matter. But rather, let's stick to the critique of the philosophy of this conversation.
That is global warming, which they've changed conveniently. They got rid of the word once scientists started disproving it. Now they only say climate change. No, I think that was just a way to extract dollars from Americans. I don't at all believe they had no actionable plan. It was great for Trump to get out of that deal. It was terrible.
Okay, but this is an incredibly complicated subject.
Right.
And if you would have to talk to a bunch of different scientists and see how they gather data and see what they understand about CO2 levels and what's the danger of them and what can combat it and what could not. Have you done all this, or do you take this flippant opinion based on the party line?
This wouldn't be the hill I died on, right? But it's not about the party. I just genuinely, I've read a ton about it, but I would not be able to come to you and say this is my strong opinion, but here's the easiest way to say this, right?
Okay.
The fact that there is a disparity in the science community about whether or not it's real is enough to...
It's very little. Yep. Very little disparity.
Okay, so the question of the disparity, right? Now, obviously, this was before COVID and all of that. The thing is, and here's where I can connect you to frenesis, which we'll get into. The idea of what Aristotle puts forward, this kind of practical wisdom, is that every fact of the world, every empirical fact, particularly scientific facts, there are going to be disparities. There are going to be disagreements between scientists as to how these facts are interpreted. But if, let's say, like in the case of climate change, 90% majority of climate scientists agree that human-made climate change is a problem, that we're responsible for this climate, the climate crisis, let's say, and the fact that we need to imminently act on it, then we can't take this detached, agnostic stance. That's where frenesis comes in, and we have to know when to act as a community, as a society. Now, it's not just obviously at an individual level. We need to collectively act on how can we deal with the climate crisis, given that majority of scientists who are experts, yes, in this case we are being elitist because they are an elite who knows climate science much better than I do, or certainly Candace Owens or Joe does. And this, so if 90% of climate scientists agree that it's a problem, and let's say 1 or 2% disagree, that doesn't mean we take this detached agnostic stance. Same thing applies to COVID and the vaccines. when we are in a once in a lifetime, hopefully once in a lifetime, global pandemic, that's when we need institutions, regardless of it being private or state. We need the state to step in. We need to act collectively and put in a plan of action or to tackle, to mitigate the consequences of what COVID did to human beings. And if not, there would be more deaths. So just because it's kind of like the whole Karl Popper's unfalsifiability principle, right? It's not a good, in my opinion, the kind of the Karl Popper idea is it's bad. It's not a good principle for science because it may work in a very niche domain of, let's say, theoretical physics, but majority of science is kind of practical science or like applied science, let's say. There's always going to be evidence that disproves a certain thesis. So we'll take COVID, we'll take climate. There's always going to be dissenters, people that disagree. And that's where we need to take that risk and figure out, are we going to act? In that sense, yes, a lot of conservatives say science isn't democratic. That's not true. A certain domain of science isn't democratic. Democratic in the sense that, yes, there's a scientific method based on empiricism, whatnot, that's used to do the science, but how we interpret what science tells us and how we act in the world, that's where frenesis comes in, the Aristotelian notion, and then it becomes democratic, or at least it becomes, in a way, a collective. It becomes something where, yes, now we need to act. Now we've got this evidence. Now let's act. Because if we keep taking, again, with COVID and with the climate crisis, if we keep taking this detached, agnostic kind of objective stance, which unfortunately Joe seems to take in this conversation, at one point it's too late. So frenesis is knowing when to act, and Candace Owens clearly doesn't see that.
Most scientists, the vast majority, agree that human beings are negatively affecting climate change.
Yeah.
The vast majority.
Yeah, I just don't think so.
But my feelings, I just don't think so. I thought she was, working for Daily Wire, the whole facts over feelings person.
Think that the very few scientists that disagree with the consensus are the ones that are correct.
Well, I think if something is, it's either subjective or it's objective, and there are objective truths.
Here we have another really interesting delineation. Subjective, objective. The problem is, again, back to how we act on the data, on the findings of climate science. That is not an objective. There's no objective basis on how to act. That's a subjective decision we need to make as human subjects. So she's wrong in the sense that there's objective truths and subjective truths. There are objective facts, but truths are subjective. So facts themselves are interpreted via a certain framework, whatever that framework may be. It could be all the way from something rather metaphysical and religious to something more practical, day-to-day political, pertaining to COVID or the climate crisis. And in that case, that's certainly a subjective reality, and then there's no objective truth per se. It's we need to act.
Right? But it's subjective if you're saying that there are some, and I don't think there's very little. There are some that don't get paid to go on TV. There's some that are not Bill Nye, who are not funded scientists, and that has been a whole...
Well, Bill Nye's not a scientist.
Exactly.
I know.
He's not. He's
it broke my heart when I found out.
Science
Mouthpiece.
propagandist.
Yeah, but that's the point.
He's no, that's not a good word.
I don't think Al Gore is a scientist.
He's not.
Right.
But Bill Nye is like a science influencer or a science entertainer.
Yeah, he's like
But he doesn't have a background in actual science. He's not a scientist. He doesn't have a PhD. He's got an
I learned about him in school. Everything I did in science had to do with Bill Nye.
Well, he promotes science, and science is not bad.
Yeah.
But the real problem is with climate change is that, for sure, there has been ups and downs throughout the history of this planet. They're observable. They follow them in. I mean, it was one of the subjects that I had earlier today with Dr. Rahul.
it's not even Bill Nye or Al Gore, whoever. Those people, I don't even like Bill Nye. I think he's a bit patronizing. But it's the IPCC. It's the collective body of the myriad institutions of science that are telling us there's a problem. And these people, in fact, it's elitists. They are experts. And unfortunately, you and I, unless we have put in the work, unless we've put in the time of becoming an expert, we can't just, again, take this kind of, it's just my truth because 1% of climate scientists think it's not a problem. That is unfortunately not how frenesis work, which is why I want to keep pausing and interrupting them, or interrupting the conversation, because it's this idea of practical wisdom. We need that to act in this world.
Robert Schoch. In 2014, the vast majority, 87% of scientists, said that human activity is driving global warming, yet only half the American public ascribe to that view. So,
well, what website is
87%, and this is
Scientific American.
Yeah.
Yeah, .com though, like that means it's making money. I don't trust that. If it was a .org, I would probably take that. But this is just a random website,
really
and
well,
I don't trust
Scientific
it.
American is not necessarily a random
It's really
website.
interesting where
Yeah,
only the websites that align with only the websites that align with her view are factually true, whereas any other website, something like Scientific American, which I don't think is some random blog somewhere, they are propaganda. They're paid for. This is in fact how paranoid we act, isn't it? This is paranoid thinking, where you think all institutions have this some kind of, again, she used the word globalist on Hillary Clinton, and I absolutely despise Hillary Clinton. I think she's terrible, but regardless, the idea that this is in fact paranoid thinking, the kind of the conspiratorial, all the institutions are to get you, are to take your freedom, or to screw America, as she would say.
I don't believe this at all. Just so you know.
You don't believe it at all?
I genuinely don't believe it. I know you do, but I genuinely don't believe it.
I believe.
No one gives a shit, Candace. It's not about what you believe. It's about how do we act in this world given we're given these facts. Your beliefs don't matter in they don't concern the matter.
Most of the time, the consensus of scientists that are studying the data.
Right.
And so what they're doing is
But do you remember all of the stories that came out about the scientists that said that when they tried to present their evidence to show, they were basically just getting shut down at every corner? You can pull that up too. Scientists who look up the opposite. Right? Instead of looking for what you're searching for, looking for what you're not looking for.
I did search for it. That's what I found.
Certainly, the whole Twitter thing, there has been certain... over here, I probably agree with Candace. I'm a free speech absolutist in many ways. You can't suppress information in that sense. But regardless, that too, because she's coming from such a paranoid, conspiratorial take, I would be very skeptical with anything she talks, any statement she makes about, scientists were censored and whatnot.
When I searched it.
Sorry.
Yeah,
but yeah, look up.
But this is my question. Yeah. Why are you so sure? This is because
what you just said. Because what you just said.
This is an extremely complicated subject,
and it is. I said I am not so sure that I would die on the hill for it. Mm-hmm. My opinion right now, and is just that it was a means. Because forget the fact of whether you believe global warming is real. Let's say it's 100% real. Let's say we know for a fact it's real. Is there a way?
Well, let's be clear.
Yeah.
Global warming, climate change is definitely real. It's happening.
Well,
the question is
why
has it happened? Yes, it has always happened.
So what is the climate change? Yes, the climate changes. It was different weather yesterday than it was today.
I'm not going to break that down. Weather and climate are two different things. Just Google it. I'm not going to spend time on it.
Climate is forever changing. That's the problem, is that people are making it seem like that's something weird.
No,
that's
unique.
Not.
You're misrepresenting the issue. The issue is people think that human beings are exacerbating climate change to the point where there's a tipping point. We cross over that tipping point. We're going to deal with huge problems that could be corrected if we act now and put a lot of funding into climate control.
Okay.
And this is what Howard Bloom...
That is correct. This is, in fact, what the IPCC has been telling us for a long time, that human activity is contributing to climate change, which is going to create unlivable conditions for vast majority of the species, including, of course, human beings.
Was on talking about a few days ago. He was talking about that the real future involves the technology of climate control, and that what we have to be really careful of is letting it get too far where you can't ever stop it and pull it back. This is what scientists are warning about. This is why they want emission standards. This is why they want to figure out how to get people to be aware of the fact that this is a real issue. Okay. Now, irregardless, human beings, if they never existed, the Earth has constantly gone through cycles. The question is not whether or not the Earth has gone through cycles of cooling and warming. Right. The question is, are we exacerbating that? The vast majority of scientists say we are. Okay. Now, this could negatively impact all sorts of coastal cities. This could be a gigantic problem. This is not like propaganda that's drummed up by some sort of big business that seeks to make money off of this, or some sort of a
they were making money off of it.
Al Gore might have made some money off of it.
Like the agreement that we were in, they were that was like the amount of money that America was losing. But here's what I was going to ask you. So let's just
wait a minute. The amount of money America was losing. Who is America?
In the Paris Agreement. This is the reason why we wanted to get out of the Paris Agreement. But that's what I wanted to get to. So let's say we all agree that global warming is real.
This is kind of neoliberal capitalist propaganda or ideology, isn't it? What is wrong? I don't see anything wrong with America losing money. I don't see anything wrong with a certain nation or even corporation, whatever, losing money if it's for the sake of the species, if it's for the sake of having a future for human beings. Who cares about losing money? And this is again where practical wisdom comes in. Why do we prioritize? I'm sorry, to use a cliche here. Why do I prioritize money and profits over human beings? Because that's typical capitalist propaganda, capitalist ideology.
Don't believe it's real, okay?
By the way, I don't even know with the Paris Agreement if she's right there. But hypothetically, if she was, I don't give a.
So I can't sit here.
But here's the question. But why have a belief?
What do you mean?
Why have a belief as to whether or not global warming is real or not real?
Because I just find that when things...
Okay. Joe is wrong there. I can see... Okay. If Candace and Joe, if these two are the only positions available, I would side with Joe. But Joe is wrong to say that in certain things, such as the climate crisis, such as COVID, such as a global pandemic, or now the imminent crisis of inequality. In certain crises, it is not right, or it's wrong to say, why have a belief? Why can't we just be objective and agnostic about it? Because it's not possible. At one point, we need to act in this world. And I'll get into what all of that means. I'll discuss the idea of Hubert Dreyfus's idea of being in the world and how that's how we perceive the world and act in this world. There are many things I want to discuss, but first let's get through the video. So when there's a climate crisis, there is no neutral stance. The stance is we as a community, as a society, globally, as globalists, in fact, to use a term conservatives hate, have to act. So there can't be a middle ground in the matter. Thinking there's a middle ground in the matter is, in fact, neoliberal ideology. And to quote Zizek himself, neoliberals always believe that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So, with the climate crisis, we could just be detached, be objective, try to take things slowly, analyze things. And if someone like Greta Thunberg makes a rather aggressive statement, call her hysterical and whatnot, but then neoliberals forget that this light at the end of the tunnel is always an oncoming train. And that, in fact, is the violence done by neoliberal ideology, the violence done by non-action. So, again, we can't be agnostic about certain matters. Some matters, yes, but some matters, no.
Don't understand
correct.
The science.
You are correct.
But why have a belief in it?
Right. So it's not a belief in it. I don't believe in it.
that's what I'm saying.
This is I want to quote Kierkegaard here. It's not believing in it is in fact a belief. You can't take a bird's eye view or a God's view in this matter. Not having a belief, in fact, does affect the world in a substantial way. So, not believing is a belief.
But you have a belief that it doesn't exist.
Right. I personally think that this was just the fact that it was presented to us by Al Gore, and
it's not presented to us by Al Gore.
Right.
Al Gore made a film,
right,
and he's been called like the first green billionaire. Yeah. He's made a shitload of money off of that.
And he flies in his private plane because he's so worried about the emissions. Okay.
That is hilarious.
Yeah,
there's something hilarious about that.
All of the people that are telling us.
But he's a fucking politician.
Right.
You know, there's grossness to all that stuff.
Right. And that's what worries me.
And here's where it's important to, I don't care about Al Gore. I remember when I was a kid, my dad gave me the documentary Al Gore made. And I haven't really looked into his stuff much. Probably a piece of politician anyway. But the messy side of politics is in fact a part of science, which is why I want to make the case in this video that science is political. We can't have an apolitical science.
Question is, let's say that it's real.
Okay.
Let's just assume, that's the best way to have the debate.
Real.
Let's say it's 100%
real.
Yeah, let's say.
Do you feel that you have found in your research that there is something that human beings can do that would change this all around?
It's possible, yes. One of the things that they're figuring out how to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and even possibly reuse it.
That's in fact a good question.
There's all sorts of things that people are trying to do. I mean, we had what was the young man who made that device? Boyan Slot. He figured out a way to make this device that pulls plastic out of the oceans. They're figuring out a way to.
That's important.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Well, because plastic just can't over time. But that's what I mean. So when I say that I'm I believe in recycling. I'm not a person that's this is. But the idea that the government is just going to take trillions of dollars because we're in some agreement where we're all agreeing that we should do something is useless. And look, from the stuff there's obviously a lot of debate here. And as I said, I'm not so. The one thing you always find with me is I'll never pretend to be so educated on something. I'm not going on college campuses talking about global warming. I don't do that. Right.
Okay, but what's really interesting is the moment Joe asked her, we can go back to that point. Don't you think we should do something about the climate? She just, superciliously just said, "Oh no, I don't think it's real at all." That kind of arrogance, that is a stance. Clearly, it's implied in her gestures of what she's conveying to her followers.
Right, but why are you saying that you don't think it exists?
I don't know. Maybe because it got because it got so politicized.
Studies into scientific agreement on
it has to get politicized. That's the point I want to make in this video. Science is political. It can't be apolitical, especially something like the climate crisis, especially something like a pandemic. It has to be politicized because in politics, it's where we act from what we're told by scientific research, by the scientists.
Human-caused global warming. And look at all the studies. It's between 100% and 91% at the lowest. 91% of one of the studies from 2014.
This is the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Yeah, they almost. It's a pretty broad consensus.
Who are they polling? Is it the people that are part of this? This.org? That's what I'm asking.
10,306 scientists to confirm over 97% of climate scientists agree, and over 97% of the scientific articles find that global warming is real and largely caused by humans. Right. So my question to you is, if you want to step outside of the scientific consensus, which is vast and involves 10,306 scientists, and just say, I don't believe in it, even if you're right, you don't have enough information to say that.
Right. No,
it's a good point. I mean, yes, maybe once in a millennia, one could be a Galileo. But that's once in a millennia. Yeah, Galileo was right, and he was persecuted by the church, but this kind of paranoid conspiratorial thinking that every single institution is out to get you, that is look, it's just stupid. That's what it is. It's stupid or willfully Machiavellian.
But that's what I said. That's the whole
point. You're
saying
you don't believe it.
I would have to have someone sit down and convince me that it was real. I personally don't believe it. That's okay. It's good to start at a place.
She will never be convinced. And that's really interesting. She thinks that she can be convinced. Because of her ideological beliefs, she can't be convinced.
Not believing something.
No, it's not.
You think you should start with believing everything.
No, it's not believe either or. Not believe yes, not believe no. Yeah. But don't say you don't believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Learn about it.
Yeah.
Learn about it and then have an opinion. But you're stating this opinion without having any real understanding.
But then that kind of either or, you can't take an either or. That is wrong. Again, certain matters, you have to have a belief. So I see what the point Joe's trying to make, but this matter in particular, we need to act.
What climate science is.
But that's exactly what an opinion is. I'm not going, like I said, if you said that, Candace, you went on to 10,000 college campuses and you said that global warming wasn't real, then we'd have a problem. You and I are just having a conversation.
Yeah, but why have an opinion on something that you don't have data about? This is my question. I don't necessarily have an opinion on climate science. I really don't, because I don't know much about it. But what I do know is that what I've read is that the vast majority of people who study it are in agreement that human beings are affecting it.
So just my recall on a lot of
itself, not at an absolute level, but what just Joe said, the vast majority of people who are experts in the matter, that should be good enough to formulate an opinion. I'm not an expert on quantum mechanics, but I would read popular science books like Carlo Rovelli's book, and try to make sense of what quantum physics and quantum mechanics tells us. But that doesn't mean I'm an expert in the matter. So yes, and we can take a stance. It's kind of detached way of living. It's impossible to live, in fact.
Other things that I read, and this was a while
in that way.
Ago. So this is when I first formed my opinion on not believing this. I read a shit ton of articles. Can't recall the data because, like I said, this wasn't something I was super passionate about. It was like somebody posted something, and then I went on like a tear reading about it.
Some conservative website.
But it was essentially just noting that in a lot of these studies, like when you go and if we had time to sit down and really pull this up, they're polling, 10,000 scientists that are within a community that is like these .orgs. Do you believe in everything that MediaMatters.org puts out for statistics? Right, that's a political arm of the Democratic Party.
We're talking about a different subject.
I know, but
politics versus science.
But this has been politicized. That's the thing.
Science has been politicized.
Yes, it has. Global warming in particular.
Certain things have to be politicized.
Particular has been politicized. 100% it has been politicized, right? That's the whole reason I fell down this dark hole one night reading about it. And I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, I don't really care.
It has been politicized, but I think that's also maybe why you're saying you don't agree with it so quickly.
I feel like that dark hole is just a whole lot of money. It's probably the dark hole she fell into. A whole lot of money.
Right.
Because it's an ideological right-wing point.
Right.
Is that global warming isn't real.
Right.
If you're one of those people that thinks global warming isn't real, you're almost always on the right.
Right.
Just so you know, though, the fact that global warming is real and we need to do something about it is in fact also an ideological left-wing point, let's say. So what I will try to convey in this video as we get into frenesis and all that is that we cannot step outside of ideology. This is a point Jack makes so brilliantly, that we all are ideological. One thing we can do is to critique ideology from within, but we can never step outside of it. So the fact that we have to do something about climate change is an ideological stance, but that's okay. Because that's how we need to exist in this world. We need to make sense of the world and derive meaning from the facts of this world. So we need ideology for that.
Right. And that's fine. But I'm telling you that, again, I didn't do a deep dive on all of this because I read about it because it was at a forefront of a discussion. So I read about it all night.
And a lot of deep diving. The amount of confidence she's got is I wish I had that kind of confidence.
Conclusion was that they started pulling up all of these studies from the person that did this that I did a deep dive on, and they started showing how these community of scientists were in fact somewhere behind that .org or someone that was being funded. So to me, the issue got too politicized for me to believe that global warming was something that was going to wipe out the world. Now,
scientists get funded. That is a fact.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that the funding affects the scientific research and the data, which they all agree on. And this is universally across the entire planet.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of scientists would not stake their reputation on false data. What they're saying is not that the only reason why the world is getting warm is because human beings. That the only reason why the climate isn't totally static for the rest of eternity is because of human beings. What they're saying is we are negatively impacting our own environment, and we're doing it because we have poor technology and we use coal and fossil fuels and emissions, and we're raising our CO2 levels. And this is based on data.
Yeah.
And this is something that you...
Just the side comment that Candace made, just existing does negatively impact the environment. In a way, she's right at a very essential level. Like she's right, but the point is, we can exist in such ways that won't exacerbate whatever the ramifications of human existence in this planet is, to the point where we go extinct as a species. So the way we exist, there is no nature, no organic unity as to how human beings exist. We can exist in different ways. Obviously, there have been myriad variants, varieties, societies within epochs of time. The way humans lived in this world have changed, and now the predominant ideology is neoliberal capitalism, and the way we exist is causing this externality of the climate crisis. And that is what's being contested by left-wing, yes, ideologues, because their ideology is to exist in a different way. And we have to. If not, that light at the end of the tunnel is going to be an oncoming train, as I said.
You could look at the data and follow where they're getting this information from, and follow how they're making these conclusions, and follow the vast majority of these brilliant people who study this shit their whole life.
Yeah, exactly. And if I was a person that was putting forth policy on climate change, or if I was a person that put out my opinion publicly on climate change, I would do all of that. I'm just not.
I understand what you're sayaying, but what I'm saying is that you are a very smart person, and people listen to you, and they're going to listen to you for a long time.
But this is what I hate. This is what I hate. Because then it's like, Candace, you have to have a formed opinion on everything.
No, you don't have to have a formed opinion on everything. What you do have to have is the ability to know when you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
But I just said that. I said that to you the entire time.
I said this believe it.
I said I don't believe it. And then you asked me, and I said this wouldn't be the hill I chose to die on, because I don't follow it.
But why even say you don't believe in it?
Because I just personally, if you...
How about not have a belief until you really have looked at the data?
So you would prefer if my language, as opposed to admitting that I do not know this, I wouldn't die on this hill, I've never made a video, I've never made a public statement, you would have preferred if I had just started by saying, I have no opinion.
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Saying I don't know is fine, but I would go one step further and say, I don't know, but the vast majority of experts on the matter are saying that the climate crisis is a reality. Therefore, I would be on the side of having to act and do something about it. I think that's the right stance to take.
That's what I'm saying. But you say
I said I didn't know.
No, you say I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. You're saying really clearly that you don't think it's real.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it would be the same if I said to you, like, do you believe in God? Right?
No, I would say I don't know.
You would say, so that's this. I feel like this is sort of like linguistics, though.
No, I would say I don't know.
Okay.
Linguistics. Well, firstly, linguistics matter. The way we act and think affect the world. But no, if it's just linguistics, those linguistical, I don't know, semantics, whatever you may call it, but the language we speak affects our lived reality. I'll put it that way.
Always say I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm agnostic.
Language we speak and use.
Most people say, like, I believe it or I don't, right? So it's like, if you say...
I think a lot of people say they don't know.
Okay, I think believe is definitely a word that's associated with God. But
right,
so
but a lot of people say that they don't know.
But if you say I don't believe in God, and then somebody starts saying, oh, you need to form it, it's like, I just don't believe in it.
No, you don't, because God is not scientific data.
Right.
There's a big difference between measuring the CO2 levels in the atmosphere and deciding whether or not there's an afterlife.
Right. I'm sorry that I just don't believe. I don't believe in global warming. I'm happy to.
You're allowed to not believe in it.
That's all I've been trying to say. Is I don't believe in it, but I have not.
You're an influencer.
Yeah, but
you're a very bright person.
But if somebody had asked me, like at a place where I'm influencing on a college campus, what's your opinion? I would say I have none.
I bet you would say I don't believe in it, like you just did.
That is absolutely not. That's not true.
In fact, she would. She would say I don't believe in it, and probably even spew out the garbage she's been spewing out in this short conversation with Joe Rogan.
There are so many instances where you could watch it. Just like, and you can ask Dave Rubin when he asks me a question, I say, I don't have an opinion
about a different subject.
But yeah, because you and I are having a conversation one-on-one. I'm not sitting here to try to. I don't go on campus talking about global warming because I don't have an opinion on it. But if you press me and ask me if I believe in it, no, I don't really believe in it. But could I go deep dive and learn that perhaps I'm wrong? Sure. I personally am inclined to believe that a lot of those studies are manipulated. As I said, during the one night that I did deep dive on it, when they showed like all the pieces of evidence or whatever, it just seemed a little shady, and I felt that it was politicized. But I think that I have a right to say that I don't believe in something, but that I also don't know. And that's what I said to you. I don't believe in it, but I wouldn't die on this hill. I don't know enough about it.
You did say you wouldn't die on this hill.
Yeah.
But you also said you don't believe in it, and you stated the reason why, because you think it's a scam.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the truth. What do you want me to do? You want me to lie to you?
No, it's okay, but I'm not sitting here saying, like... it's a complicated issue. It's very, very complicated.
It may be complicated, that's fine, but what do you want me to lie to you and say, I'm not a politician? You want me to... You should the correct term, like, I feel like this is like the editing people do, like when they're like, Obama, if they ask a question, you don't know, this is... I'm not running for office. I'm answering, I'm talking to you. I don't believe in it.
I appreciate that. I
can't be fake. This is my number one problem in life is I can't be fake. And I know that you're pressing me here and that you want me to adjust and to say, like, I do not have an opinion, but I'm not, like, a politician. Exactly.
And people are going to be mad at me.
It's weird. Could I change my perspective and believe in it a year after I restart?
If you were just a regular person, you said I don't believe in it, I'd probably go, all right. The problem is you're not. You're a very influential.
But I'm you know what's ironic? Stuff. I don't know. I think that there's like more concerns in society. Like I personally think that some scientists started talking about global warming and it got politicized and they figured it was another way to extract. People are flawed. So I'm advised. But I'm not gonna like.
Look, the rest of it doesn't really matter. Let's get to the crux of this video. And if you did skip all of that, I totally understand because you just can watch the original video. But okay, frenesis, practical wisdom. Here's where things get interesting. And it's through frenesis we have to understand why science is indeed political, as I've stated in the title of the video. So a few definitions. I like to get the theoretical definitions out of the way, just so we know where we're coming from. Firstly, Aristotle wrote about frenesis in his book Nicomachean Ethics, which I think initially was called Ethics. There's a whole section where he discusses the concept of frenesis pertaining to science, scientific knowledge, and whatnot. It's interestingly very readable, very clear. I don't know if Aristotle was a lucid writer, but at least the translator has done a great job with the translation. If you're interested, read Nicomachean Ethics. Although, I have to be honest that I came across this via Hubert Dreyfus. Firstly, what is frenesis? Here's what Aristotle says. All free males are born with the potential, so obviously all people that is, born with the potential to become ethically virtuous and practically wise. But to achieve these goals, they must go through two stages. During their childhood, they must develop the proper habits, and then, when their reason is fully developed, they must acquire practical wisdom, frenesis. And this frenesis is what should be not only a part of a certain individual to living their life virtuously, but should expand into our institutions too, to the structures of society. And that's the point that David Gangnam makes in his paper. So, as I said before, it was in fact Hubert Dreyfus who, in his lectures on Heidegger, he introduced this concept of frenesis and how much Heidegger was influenced by Aristotle's idea of frenesis and practical wisdom. Firstly, this is where I said when we were watching the video of Joe saying, why not just say I don't know and take this kind of detached objective stance. I said that it is not possible for us to take a detached objective stance because, to use a term by really, I don't think it was coined, or it wasn't coined by Heidegger. It was in fact kind of like a neologism derived from Heidegger's work, coined by Dreyfus, Hubert Dreyfus, who is a great American philosopher. We are all beings who are being in the world. That is, to use a technical definition from this paper on Hubert Dreyfus. For Dreyfus, human intelligence can be understood only in light of our embodied manner of being in the world. We attend to our characteristic embodiment. We see that human intelligence is first and foremost and most fundamentally practical as opposed to theoretical. Because of this, the elevation of theoretical rationality that is the bedrock of the Western philosophical tradition is a profound mistake. For theory proceeds from, depends upon, and ultimately is merely one species of doing. Now, this is a very important para. The reason being, because we human beings are being in the world, science itself has, in a way, a practical... Science itself doesn't exist in a silo. I'll put it that way. Science itself is undergirded by this idea of frenesis or practical wisdom by the very fact that we are beings in this world who are embodied creatures with our own motivations, desires, intentions. We get hungry, we want to we get horny, we got to do things. We aren't just these abstract entities that just live theoretically. So in that way, even the institutions of science are deeply political because not political in the sense of this like day-to-day, politics. I mean more in the sense of, here's a question worth asking. How does a scientist decide which discipline of science to pursue? How does a scientist decide which part of a certain theory to focus on when they're given myriad facts? So these decisions we make, they all come from us being in the world. And obviously, science is done by scientists who are human beings. And the realities of every other human being, motivations, whatever you may call them, the cognitive realities apply to these human beings. They aren't abstract creatures or abstract entities. And therefore, because we are being in the world, science itself requires this foundation of frenesis for the science to be done. And in a way, I'm not trying to say science is teleological, that we properly calculate and rationally know where exactly to take the science per se. But so many decisions we make, what studies to fund, which scientists to elevate, which theories to elevate, they come from the messy world of our social reality of being in the world. And that is why a part of that social reality is politics. It's political. And especially pertaining to the question of the climate crisis or the pandemic, we are beings that require frenesis. And that means the institutions we create, the structures of society, also require this kind of practical wisdom to know where to send funds, what to pay attention to. It can't be done in this objective, detached way, because that's not what we human beings are. And as I said a million times already, scientists are human beings. Okay, now I'm gonna go through and read out giant excerpts of this paper by David Gagnon. I think it's Gangnam, but I'm not sure. But by David. And I think he beautifully connects this idea of frenesis, which at first, especially when you read Nicomachean Ethics, you think it's a very individualistic way of being, but he shows how the idea of frenesis and the fact of being in the world is deeply connected to our institutions and what we call the science. So the two sections I want to read off from is in the paper is the part, the science versus Peterson, and Baudrillard, reality and truth. So about 2 years ago, I already did a podcast on this paper, Jordan Peterson and the Flow of Scientific Inquiry. So if you want to know what this paper is all about, actually read the paper. I'll leave a link down below in the description, or go and watch that podcast. But the idea is, David tries to show how the so-called objective truths that Jordan Peterson presents, pertaining especially to gender ideology, it isn't objective at all, and it isn't based in any kind of scientific reality, that it is deeply ideological and politically motivated. And here we get to the section, the science versus Peterson. So the way this connects obviously to the idea of the climate crisis is that the same way the whole conversation about gender, it's not a merely scientific conversation or a biological conversation. The conversation about the climate crisis is also not a merely solely a scientific conversation. It is science and politics intertwined. So I'm not going to, expand on too much of these paras. I'm just going to read them out because I think David's done a good job at elucidating the points he's got to make. But if there are any comments I've got to make as I'm reading them, I will do so. Let's start off. The science versus Peterson. Though Peterson's line of argumentation seems to suggest a science/postmodernism opposition, a considerable number of scientific journals have published articles addressing the growing stigmatization and discrimination trans and genderqueer people experience regularly. Such articles, though they conform to the same scientific rationale utilized by Peterson, shed light on the great deal of contradictions, oppositions, and divergent beliefs in the supposedly objective field of study. These studies correspond to the domain of research that aligns with the Aristotelian maxim of frenesis, which is what we discuss, which may be understood as fostering political, intellectual activity aimed at clarifying the problems, risks, and possibilities we face as humans and society. So, the same way, if these scientific studies show us or tell us that trans and genderqueer people are facing certain mental health issues and stigmatization and whatnot, if that's what the empirical facts tell us, then frenesis comes in and tells us how do we derive an ought from this fact. What should we do about that? And frenesis itself is a part of the scientific institutions, keep in mind. And the same thing obviously applies to the climate crisis. If we are told by the empirical facts, by scientific research, that, there's a problem, now frenesis tells us, okay, how do we act? And what are the oughts from these findings? As David states, this approach, although still immersed in the scientific tradition, stands opposed to the other domain of Aristotelian reason, of episteme, that proclaims that a priori nature of scientific knowledge. This brand of research, while disavowed by Peterson, presents a foray into the lives and experiences of marginalized groups that would otherwise be silenced. So, I would even argue that even episteme, which again, that is more of the a priori nature of science, particularly in theoretical physics, let's say, that itself has an element of frenesis because, again, to do the science, there are many other structures that allow scientists to practice the science. And if we don't have the kind of the institutions with the practical judgment as a part of it, then scientists can't do this kind of theoretical speculation and theoretical science because, again, to go back to Dreyfus's idea, we are beings in the world. Therefore, we have to be allowed. Frenesis, I'd put it this way, frenesis has to give way for episteme to take place. So the section Baudrillard, reality and truth, this perhaps is a good section to kind of understand the concept I was bringing up by Zizek before, that we can never step outside of ideology, that ideology itself is how reality presents itself to us, a Lacanian point. And I'll see if, I'm hoping, because I'm not reading out the whole section, I'm reading out excerpts, hopefully this all comes together, but let's see what David tells us. Lisa Fieldman Barrett, is that how you say it? Yeah, Barrett, I'm assuming, professor of psychology at Northeastern University, has greatly challenged what she calls the classical view of emotion that maintains there to be universal attributes to human emotion and interaction. In her How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, she disturbs this classical view by suggesting that the world is understood by humans through simulations, or ideology, which dictates what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. Moreover, these simulations can cause tangible changes in your body. While Barrett does not draw a direct parallel between her own work and that of Baudrillard, there are many parallels between their conceptions of simulation. This is because, like Baudrillard, Barrett is trying to wrest the broader scientific community from the clutches of transcendental universalistic assumptions regarding emotion and the human body. Barrett proposes that we become attuned to our relationship to simulation opposed to these transcendent principles because people spend at least half their waking hours simulating rather than paying attention to the world around. And this pure simulation strongly drives their feelings. And this, in fact, could even connect to how a scientist practices science. The fact that the scientist is a human being in the world affects this episteme part of scientific knowledge. Although, of course, I understand that, within the scientific system, there are frameworks and let's even call it locks put in to protect the scientific system from human beings. Nonetheless, it's still scientists doing the science. Reality for Baudrillard is always caught in a play of signification and suggestions of a naturality made by the authoritative scientific community mistake the only true nature of the world as a world of appearances in which there may not be anything but a discourse of the real and the rationale. According to Baudrillard, then, Notions of an objective truth are fundamentally flawed, and any attempt to occupy an objective field of study is bound to fail and merely become science signifiers of a real signified. The fundamental impossibility of performing objective studies and or of revealing fundamental truths is understood by Baudrillard and his theory of simulation. For Baudrillard, simulation occurs when the world has become real beyond our wildest expectations and can be described as the outcome of a calculated move to put the illusion of the world to death. It's really interesting how some French intellectuals write, but regardless, I think he makes an interesting point there. Scientific discourses that rely on notions of objectivity and truth therefore dissolve into the imaginary of the sign or the sphere of truth, and leaves us with the reality and therefore simulation in all its glory. The real, then, is merely a particular case of that simulation that Baudrillard argues allows our society to think itself and live itself as superior to all others. Jordan Peterson's understanding of the world as fixed, stable, and decipherable through the use of science therefore operates to uphold and reinforce the realm of oppressive simulation. This is more pertaining to the whole gender ideology bit. But, of course, this could be replaced with Candace Owens' understanding, and you could say that her understanding ultimately uses the so-called science to, well, unfortunately in this case, lead to the extinction of the human species. For Baudrillard, the only adequate way to challenge Peterson's oppressive rhetoric within this realm of simulation is to engage with seduction, a concept he defines as the symbolic mastery of forms, but rather than attempts to understand the world as existing outside of appearances, representation, or ideology. Seduction diverts things from their identity, their reality, to destine them for the play of appearances, for their symbolic exchange. Baudrillard's seduction opposes Peterson's scientific discourse precisely because seduction is able to engage with the world at the level of appearances. This approach remains faithful to his concept of singularity as it takes cultural formations in the demonstration of rites and rituals as eminent in any culturally faithful analysis in the form of science or otherwise. This line of argumentation may be observed in Baudrillard's earlier work when he argues that only a critique of the political economy of the sign can analyze how the present mode of domination is able to regain, integrate, and simultaneously take advantage of all previous archaic modes of production and exchange, infra or trans-economic. Baudrillard's work can then be read as not necessarily opposing the domain of scientific inquiry, but accounting for the degree to which any scientific inquiry should be attuned to the cultural and significator conditions of the object of study. And that last bit's really important because, of course, cultural conditions or signifying conditions, all these things certainly pertain to how we act when it comes to climate change. And that's something that both Joe Rogan and Candace Owens miss in their conversation about the science, as we colloquially say. All right, this last bit I went through one more time and I realized it wasn't all that pertinent to our topic at hand as to why science is political. It's more pertaining to gender ideology and how science itself can be a tool for oppression. But hope you got the point I was trying to make. And I'm going to try and do a bit more of these kinds of videos where I use, like this kind of viral content, debate bro kind of content, and then try to kind of, drive the conversation towards something more substantial and philosophical to get us thinking as to why things aren't as straightforward as we think they are on the surface.